Thank you so much for being here. Happy Friday, and welcome to the Giving USA Review of Results and Analysis. My name is Rick Happy. I'm a Principal Managing Director of CCS Fundraising, and I do want to welcome everyone here this morning. It's going to be a great session. We've got updated statistics on philanthropy from 2016, and we have a wonderful panel that is going to share their perspectives. We have an opportunity. I'm going to ask them some questions to start, and then we're going to open up to the audience and have you ask them questions on that this year for you to take a look at. And then once we do that, I'll invite the panelists to come on up, and we'll spend some time asking questions. So we have a great panel, and I should say a very good-looking panel too, okay? So, I mean, you can see for yourselves. The panel represents different sectors and different roles, which we are also delighted about. So whatever seat you're sitting in this morning, there's someone on the panel who probably reflects that seat. Cindy Goldberg is the Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees of the Castilleja School in Palo Alto. She's also Chair of the Capital Campaign. Erin Hickey is the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Development for Children's Health at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospitals. Kathy Jackson is the CEO of Second Harvest Food Bank, Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. And Preston Walton is Senior Associate Vice President for Development at the University of San Francisco. So they're a great group, and we're really delighted to have them here, and we really appreciate your willingness to serve on the panel. CCS, I think most of you know, we have so many friends in the room, and we're so happy that you're here. We really see ourselves as a fundraising, consulting, and management firm. Somebody said that we worked in 5,000 cities. I think that should say small towns and cities, not just cities, and all over the country and in Europe as well. And you probably will see your logo here on this slide or this slide. And these are some of the wonderful organizations we work with in the Bay Area. And you can see really spanning the sectors, whether it's healthcare or religion, social services, human services, education, conservation, really cultural institutions across the board. And I think that's really kind of reflects not just who we are, but also really reflects the strength, really, and the vibrancy of philanthropy in the Bay Area. It really is one of the great places for philanthropy in the world and in the country. We've done these events now all over the country, and you can see we've already had an event in Los Angeles. We had an event in St. Louis. We've had an event in New York and Boston. We'll be having an event on Monday in Denver. And we eagerly await these statistics and this data every year. We really look forward to what are the numbers, what do they look like, what do they mean, what do they tell us, how do they impact our work and our organizations. And that's some of what we're going to talk about this morning too with the panel, just so you have a sense of that. If you want to download the data, this is the page. Go to ccsfundraising.com, 2017 landscape. So please feel free to do that. And as I said, we'll do an overview on the overall perspective, the Bay Area, then we'll have the panel discussion. So $390 billion is the most money that's ever been given in philanthropy in the history that this has been tracked in 60 years. This is really where we are now. We've had probably since 2011 elevated growth year after year after year after year. And you'll see in a second maybe leveling off a wee bit, but this is the most money that's ever been given across all the philanthropic sectors in the United States, greater than corporate tax revenue collected by the federal government. And you can see who's giving. 72% is coming from individuals, 15% from foundations, 8% from bequests, and 5% from corporations. If you really slice these numbers a little bit more closely, about half of all foundations are really family foundations. So if you think about family foundations, bequests, individuals, almost 90% of all philanthropy comes from people. Not corporations, not big estates, but comes from people. Now, a 2.7% increase isn't great. It was higher last year, was much higher the year before, so we sense that there might be a little leveling off in philanthropy. We'll talk about that in a second. Last year at this time, the overall number was $373 billion, if some of you recall that. So if you took that number compared to today's number, it's actually about a 4.7% increase. The difference is about mid-year, the Indiana Center on Philanthropy, which tracks this data, makes an adjustment. And they made an adjustment last year from 373 up to about 380, where they have a better sense of what the numbers are and the tax receipts. So the adjusted number is about 2.7%. I think about from year to year, it's probably more like 4.5%, which is better for us. But still, we are seeing that there's been such growth in philanthropy. The economy has been so strong, especially in the Bay Area, that we didn't believe that we're going to go on for year after year after year at double-digit growth. As I said earlier, individuals do make a huge difference. They're giving up almost 4% in 2016. A decline in bequests of about 9%. Which means that we're getting healthier, apparently. That may change, though, if things happen in Washington that we don't want them to happen. So we may see a real boost in bequests next year, unfortunately. It's a terrible joke. Who wrote that one for me, anyway? So, not good. Giving by foundations actually declined the previous year, so it's up 3.5%. And corporate giving really does remain roughly around 5% year after year after year. You know, sometimes if the economy is dipping a little bit, we'll see corporate giving maybe at 4.5%. If the economy is really moving, it's about 5.5%. But corporate giving is very, very steady at about 5%. And we don't really see that changing very much. These are the sectors that receive the funds. So religion is holding steady at about 32%. It represents a third of all philanthropy. About 12 years ago, that number would have been 36%. 40 or 50 years ago, that number would have been 50%. But the Indiana Center had several years ago targeted religion as one sector that was under sort of threat from declining giving, but it is held steadier than we had anticipated. Education is the second largest sector, and you can see almost $60 billion. So just about half of religion, and is a very strong, vibrant sector. About 3/4 of all the funds for education go to colleges and universities, and about a quarter of them go to independent schools, secondary schools, and primary schools. And you can see on the left side other large sectors: human services, social services, foundations, health, and then some of the smaller sectors: public society, you know, United Way and organizations like that, arts, culture, humanities, environment as well. Each of the sectors has remained, they have seen growth. We're still playing around with some of these numbers, so if you look at your sector, you'll see that the sectors are growing individually. And this might be a little bit of an understatement. Political events may have impacted giving. One of the things that we are finding, especially in the Bay Area, as political giving increases around elections, charitable giving declines, then there's an uptick. However, there's a caveat. One of the things that we have found and seen in the last 4 to 6 months is some donors making decisions that they didn't anticipate making before last year's election, and organizations that they're supporting that they probably wouldn't have supported with such high volume gifts that they are now. So we are seeing probably for the first time in decades, if ever, how political results are impacting philanthropy, and not necessarily in the most positive of ways. This is an imperfect chart about million-dollar gifts. It's harder to track million-dollar gifts, obviously, from individuals than it is from corporations or foundations, but it does give you the sense of the kinds of gifts that are coming into colleges and universities, healthcare organizations, arts institutions. One thing that is fascinating is that religious organizations, when we talk about religion being a third of all philanthropy, those are houses of worship. That's not religiously affiliated hospitals or universities or schools, just houses of worship. They don't typically attract very large gifts. Colleges and universities attract very large gifts. Healthcare organizations, some arts organizations tend to attract very large gifts. And you can see that, again, imperfectly as we try to chart this on this slide. So this is sort of the bugaboo around philanthropy. We're really sort of stuck at about 2 to 2.1% of GDP as philanthropy is part of the overall gross domestic product. It might go down one year to 1.9%. It might go up to 2.2%. It is always around 2 to 2.1%, despite the fact the economy is strong, despite the fact we're in the Bay Area where there's tremendous growth. So we, and I mean that really collectively, everybody in this room and everybody who's involved with philanthropy, have to think about ways to elevate philanthropy so that it's higher percentage of GDP, not just stuck around 2%. This has been really the case for about the last 40 years. So again, stronger cases for support, retention systems, cultivation, donor education, data. I think the second point there, stronger donor retention systems, is probably the key to some of this, because what we hear from a lot of our clients and organizations is, they were really involved with us for several years, but then we lost track of them, or they stopped giving, or we didn't hold on to them. But this is sort of the what we're calling the stubborn 2% giving rate, and we need to, if we're really going to affect change and impact organizations, we've got to break through this so it's up to 2.5%, 3% over time. Last year, again, this is total giving inflation adjusted. This is S&P inflation adjusted. So a hotter stock market in 2016 than in total giving. Again, just a data point, not a lot of, analysis that we can give you on that, but it typically is not such a stark difference between the S&P and its growth and philanthropy and its growth. I will say the flip side of this is in 2008, 2009, 2010, when we had volatility like crazy in terms of the stock market and enormous declines, 40, 50%, we didn't see those kinds of declines in philanthropy. We saw a 3% decline. We saw a 2% decline. The only time we ever had philanthropy decline 2 years in a row, but it wasn't volatile. So this is not unexpected or even alarming in some ways. So high net worth individuals are people who have a liquid net worth of $1 million or more. We think there are probably 8 or 9 million of them, families across the country. 90% of them gave last year, and an average gift of $25,000. 60% of the general population gave an average gift of $2,500. And you can see in the bottom, 85% of high net worth individuals plan to give as much or more in the next 3 years. So people aren't saying, I'm tapped out, we're giving too much, we're stretched too thin. They are saying we're going to keep giving at the rates we're giving, or we're going to give more. So a little bit on the Bay Area landscape, and then I'll have the panel come up. So in the Bay Area, there's about 44,000 registered public charities, 2.9 million households, $95 billion in nonprofit revenues, more than 50 billionaires, $247 billion you see in nonprofit assets, 14 of the country's wealthiest cities in the top 50, and an overall population of 8.2 million. In San Francisco, we have a slide on San Francisco and a slide on Silicon Valley, 15 nonprofits in the Philanthropy 400, 3 donors in the Philanthropy 50 who contributed at least $165 million to San Francisco, to nonprofits, not necessarily San Francisco nonprofits, in 2016, and $4.2 billion raised by the top 15 nonprofits in San Francisco as part of the Philanthropy 400. In Silicon Valley, we saw an increase of 150% giving between 2008 and 2013. There's a 292% increase in the number of Schwab and Fidelity donor advised funds in Silicon Valley, which is far greater than anywhere else in the country. I mean, it really is amazing. And to see the growth around philanthropy in Silicon Valley is really, for us at least, very reassuring, encouraging in some ways, and we're really optimistic about that continuing. More than 8 in 10 Silicon Valley nonprofits identify themselves as community-based, which is very interesting. Almost half of them, we saw an increase in private foundations between 2005 and 2015, twice the national growth rate. 21% of cash gifts from Schwab and Fidelity DAFs held by Silicon Valley donors that went to Silicon Valley nonprofits. And then finally, a quarter of charitable giving goes to community-based organizations in Silicon Valley. So these are some of the top Bay Area nonprofits. Again, these are the largest. This is not all of them. So the largest 290, you can see human service, a little bit skewed from the national perspective. Human services, arts and culture, international aid, the environment, health. You can see religions all the way down at the bottom at 1% in the Bay Area. Go back to church, people. Come on. Trust me, next 3.5 years, you're going to need it. I'm kidding. I wrote that one. So this is a very interesting slide, and you think about individual giving and potential in the Bay Area and California. So median contribution in California is just a bit higher than it is in the Bay Area. You can see the percentage of income giving basically the same, 2.8%. average contributions by income level. People of $200,000 or more are giving away $22,000 a year. $100,000 to $200,000 are giving away almost $3,000 a year. You can see people with $50,000 to $74,000 are giving away $2,100 a year in a place where it's impossible to get to affordable housing. It's really incredible if you think about the generosity of people in this country and in the Bay Area. Again, I think I talked about corporate giving as being really steady at 5%. We've had some great stories, though, about corporate giving. Google has been the leading corporate donor in the Bay Area for 2 years running, supports great organizations like Tipping Point, Year Up, Peninsula Bridge, Second Harvest Food Bank, Citizen Schools, Co-ed, Ed. I mean, they've really done some great stuff. And I will say that I think that we're seeing a higher elevation in terms of visibility around philanthropy from a lot of Bay Area companies, Silicon Valley companies. You can see some of the numbers in terms of the Fortune 500 companies, the Fortune 1000 companies, and some of what some of those gifts look like. We have a robust foundation community in San Francisco. 250 new foundations were established in the Bay Area in 2016. $260 million in new assets. Almost 4,200 grant-making and other foundations, $77 billion in total assets. We've seen 4,600 gifts of $1 million or more since 2000, 233 in excess of $10 million. And you can see some of the organizations, again, that the foundations support: higher education, the environment and animals, public society benefit, secondary education, and international. Again, skewed a little bit from what national foundations are doing and what national giving trends look like. So what I would love to do is invite our 4 panelists, Erin, Kathy, Preston, and Cindy, up. And I'd like to spend a few minutes asking you guys some questions. And then I would like to invite the audience to ask questions as well. So give us a few minutes to have a little chit-chat. And then we will invite audience participation as well. So in case you're wondering, the pin is Prince, okay? I don't know. It just is. So what I would love to do, panel, is just throw some questions out, and please, you all represent different walks of life, different sectors, so if you can give us, if you have a different reaction or takeaway from another panelist, we'd love to hear it. But I guess the first question, sort of the general question, is what are your reactions to the information? What are some of the key takeaways for all of our friends here in the audience?
Well, I can tell you what I was most shocked by was the correlation between philanthropy and political giving in election years. Mm-hmm. I've never seen the data that clearly presented for, and I think we certainly experienced that ourselves during that time too, so I just found that fascinating.
Did you find that some of the things I mentioned about people shifting political because of the political circumstances, it has impacted, UCSF Benioff?
I don't think it's impacted us, but I think each organization is probably a little different. So one of the things that we have in children's health generally is that it affects us greatly what happens in Washington, right. Particularly in the children's hospitals in Oakland, where we have a 72% Medi-Cal population and more than 60% in our San Francisco hospital. So we're impacted greatly by the decisions that happen. And the same holds true with NIH funding. So if we were to see cuts in that would have a great impact on what we're able to do as a research institution. So because of that, our storyline has the ability to shift a little bit. So if you're looking to affect change, there's still a great benefit in investing in us to do some of that work.
Yeah.
I'd jump off of Erin's comments. I'd say for us at University of San Francisco, we had kind of a tale of two cities. On our annual fund side, particularly with our phonathon callers, our students that call our alumni, we did see a drop. And certainly right after the election that we spent most of the rest of the year trying to catch up on. I know I was guilty of that and some of the quick giving to the environment and that I was doing after the election myself. But that was something that was noticeable, and it did take us the rest of the fiscal year to try to course correct. On the other side, in a very positive sense, our Vice President for Development and our president were already in conversations with the donors on our campaign committee, and the election actually accelerated and emboldened what they were doing and really actually allowed our leadership to secure one of the largest gifts the university's received before. And so we definitely saw that motivation of, and it was an opportunity for us to actually to kind of highlight the fact of being a Jesuit Catholic institution in San Francisco and being able to position ourselves as an institution that could legitimately affect change in society with our graduates and with our students, and seeing donors rise to that occasion and decide we need to make this gift now because of what we're seeing nationally.
Kathy, what's your takeaway from Second Harvest?
So it's hard not to talk about the political scene and the impacts, right? What we saw right after the election was it was impossible to break through the noise. Normally you expect right after the election, a day or two, things are going to kind of calm down and people will get back to normal. Nobody got back to normal. And I was contrasting for our development team. I think between the election and December 31st, I had 50-some emails from Planned Parenthood. And I had 4 from Second Harvest Food Bank. So, and we were a little worried maybe we were overdoing it. And it wasn't until we finally, about mid-December, were able to break through and convey that the need was actually going up in our area, and we were seeing softness in our fundraising. And that finally motivated people, and they came through. And we've always found the community responds in that kind of a circumstance. But there's a moment where you find yourself saying, gosh, maybe it'd be better if we were like the ACLU, or we were in climate, or we were Planned Parenthood. Whoa, beware of what you wish for, because now food stamps are on the cutting block. Right. And food stamps provide 2.5 to 3 times as much food into Santa Clara and San Mateo County as Second Harvest Food Bank. So if those are cut meaningfully, and the Trump budget suggests a 25% cut, there is no way in the world that we can make that up. So we may actually get our wish to be the cause of the day. And maybe that's good for Second Harvest Food Bank, but it's terrible for the people that we serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Castilleja, I think it's unique because we are a non-sectarian all-girls school. And the fact that Hillary came as close as she did and went further than any other female has in an election and campaign thus far, it allowed us to incorporate women in leadership into our narrative even more than we always do. And being in Silicon Valley as well, we all are aware for a variety of reasons. There's a disproportionate number of women in leadership roles in Silicon Valley, and so I think this, the entire concept of women in leadership, is something that we've always incorporated, but now it's kind of given us a boost because everyone's awareness has been raised. Yep. So sadly, it's a little bit of a gift to our messaging to kind of rally these young girls and young women.
So it's June 23rd. So at what point do we sort of stop talking about the political environment and refocus? I mean, how does that happen? I mean, it certainly feels to me like it's something we've never experienced, just in terms of the drama and the heightened awareness of everything that's happening around politics. But how do organizations, what's our advice to organizations about kind of refocusing and staying on message, if you will?
For us, I feel like we've already started that. I think similarly, there was the several months where all we were talking about internally was, what does this mean? But I think that within our development team, certainly across the leadership of our university, we really doubled down on our mission. It really made more salient. And I remember Peter Wiltshire, our Vice President of Development's here. We were sitting in the conference room the day after the election, and our Chancellor came in, and we had a very salient conversation around the importance of the mission of our university now more than ever. And I think that that's been kind of where we've put all of our energy into, is the importance of access to higher education, particularly for the underserved in the community, the importance of graduating a diverse nursing workforce, scientists and others. It's made even more important the campaign that we're in, and I think it's galvanized a lot of our leaders to internally, particularly in our campaign committee and our trustees, to ask us hard questions to make sure that we're making our case the strongest to donors.
And I'm hoping that because of this swell of awareness and individual giving and this kind of democratization of philanthropy that we've seen in these
Yep.
numbers is very exciting going forward for the future. And hopefully we can, like you said, divert from the political conversation, solely the political conversation. But I do think it's laying some very important groundwork for future giving.
Yep.
Based on my own personal experience, my husband and I giving,
Yep.
what we found is that it's donating as an individual is a building block process where when you're approached for your first gift of $1 million, it's absolutely shocking and you're thinking, oh, like that's so much money, and it is. But when you're approached the next time, it's not as big of a deal.
Yep.
And then when you're approached for a $5 million gift, it just feels a little bit more comfortable with each ask and with each consideration, each organization that wants you to consider it a gift.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that now that more individuals than ever have broken through, at least to their foundation level, whatever that may be, of giving, that will open doors to continuous giving across the board, not just,
Yep.
to kind of fend off this current administration, but to education, to all kinds of things. So I'm really hoping that there's a silver lining, that people now have jumped into this individual giving pool, and they will continue to do so.
So Cindy, that's a really helpful, I'm sorry, yeah, that's
I was just going to say, could I get your email?
We've always supported Second Harvest.
I was gonna say every gift officer in the room, listen, remember what this vice chair of the board just said.
This is the most important comment in person that you will meet today.
But I think it's true for everybody at every level, whether it's your first $100 gift, and the alumni at our school as well. We are now really stepping up to tap into our alumni
Right.
group, because we haven't really made a solid approach yet, and we're starting to do that. And we feel that once we start pulling them in and they get used to this concept, they will continue to,
This is an important, but I think, Cindy, for everybody in the audience, in all seriousness, I think the message here also is, you just don't go and just ask people for gifts that you don't have relationships with, that they don't have a history with you, that, that donors grow, they grow as philanthropists, they grow in terms of their amounts, and they also grow within organizations. So I think that's an important message here too, is that it's just not somebody who, we know who they are, they have high capacities, let's go ask them for $1 million.
Yeah,
But it
they have
really-
to have some passion
Have to have the passion.
around the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
Well, and that was one of the points you made in your presentation too, is around donor retention
Totally.
and what
Yeah.
people are doing to
Yep.
invest in that work.
Yeah, it's really one of, I think, the great challenges in philanthropy is, and we'll talk a little bit in a second, I have a question for you guys about, resources, expending resources on development versus, trying to keep the cost per dollar raised. I have a question that I want to ask Erin and Kathy in particular, given your organizations. You heard me about corporate giving. And, part of that is to message to everyone that don't get your hopes up. But talk a little bit about what, the other side of that. What have been your positive experiences around corporate giving? And are there any kinds of messages or nuggets that you can share that people can take away that have been some of your own experiences around successful corporate giving?
I'll eliminate Salesforce from the discussion because that one was a little easier for us. But I think what we are seeing with corporations is that it's not transactional and that it is a whole body of work. So what are the other levels of engagement? And it's a lot of work. I mean, I see you nodding, but I think what corporations are looking for is not a direct gift. They certainly want to see the impact, but it is, what is the access level to the whole organization? How do they use that partnership to drive employee engagement? Looking at Salesforce and what they've done with a 1-1-1 model and promoting that. But I think we do struggle in being able to create those opportunities for these corporations, particularly at the level that they want to. I see my colleague Amelia in the room back there who actually works on a lot of this. And we can't bring people through the hospitals all the time. There are sick kids, and that's our primary goal, is to make sure that we're taking care of these kids. So what are some other creative ways that we can be engaged in their employee activity day, putting together kits for kids? But I think from the outset, when you're thinking about engaging with a corporation, you need to have a multi-layer, multi-tier plan for overall engagement.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But I will say that we have seen a meaningful softening of dollars from corporations. So I was really interested actually in the report that on average corporations account for about 5% of giving. Second Harvest Food Bank, they account for about 16% of our giving. But 5 years ago, that number was 27%. And so what I can tell you is that the dollars from corporations have dropped both relatively as a contributor, but also absolutely they have dropped to us. And so why is that? What we have seen is, I think the old model of corporate philanthropy was the senior team determined what their key causes would be. So for example, Cisco would, across the globe, hunger was a key initiative because everybody in every country had people that were struggling with hunger, and they viewed that as, and their employees were told it wasn't coercive, it wasn't you won't get promoted if you don't, but it was, these are our corporate philanthropic priorities, and we really hope and expect that you'll support them, as well as the causes that you personally care the most about, your schools, your churches, et cetera. That is really changing to employee-driven models of philanthropy. And so what you may see the same dollars, but they're spread across many, many, many more organizations. One might argue they have less impact. We were talking beforehand about the fact that a lot of the beneficiaries are fitness-driven philanthropies. So everybody's, 10K walk, 30K run, whatever it might be, training for a marathon, et cetera. So leukemia, lymphoma, breast cancer walks, AIDS bike rides, and in no way am I impugning those causes, which are incredibly important, but that is something that employees will tend to surface because it can help them with their own goals as well as philanthropic goals. Yep. So it's a challenge. We have a lot of people that come through our facility as volunteers. It's easier to have them sort food than to hang around the patients. But it is transferring volunteerism to volunteers to donors can also be challenging. So because people can come in and they feel they did a good thing, and in fact they did. They gave of their time. Maybe they don't feel like they also need to write a check. And so we're exploring ways to try to increase the yield, if you will, from that intersection.
I think the other interesting thing that we have in our region right now as it pertains to corporate giving is a lot of the companies, particularly newer companies who are accelerating really quickly, don't have philanthropic strategies,
Yeah.
one. Two, they have a little less geographic loyalty to the way that they work. Because of how their business works,
Yeah.
right? They don't have a lot of walls. It's up there. It's
global.
somewhere. And it's global and it's national, and I think they're also thinking about their giving in that way and their engagement. So I think we have a little bit of a unique scenario here where we don't have as many long-term embedded in the community corporations.
And another thing that Kathy and I were talking about earlier, and you were saying, is that a lot of times corporations will donate in-kind gifts and give a bunch of hardware and software, which is fantastic. But you also need the cash. And so these corporations, I think, sometimes gift in a different way.
It's not
and
necessarily
the
a win
dollars.
to go from a $100,000 unrestricted cash gift to an in-kind donation of hardware and software that you may or may not actually need.
Or know how to use.
Or know how to use, yeah. Good
Challenging.
Yes, thank you.
I was going to say, as long as it's NetSuite, Cindy, it's good. That's the key. All right.
Thanks for that plug.
Yeah. So, we've been talking, Kathy, it's fascinating to me what you said about, you got 50 emails from the ACLU and you got 4 from Second Harvest. So, donor retention, let's talk about that a little bit more because I do think that is really a key to this. So one of the questions I have is, how much is too much versus how much is too little? And so, Preston, you experienced this certainly at USF with alumni. I mean, how often do you do that? Kathy and Erin, you guys see this in terms of people who are giving. Do you go back to them? Cindy, from a donor's perspective, how do you rate that? So can you guys talk a little bit about that? How do you find that balance? Because I do think that the retention game or race, if you will, is sort of critical to every nonprofit success.
So our story at USF has been evolving in a really exciting way. About 2015, 2016, Peter Wilch arrived at USF as our new VP of Development and made a case to our trustees that hadn't been made in a long time of the need for investment in our development team. We had a development team of about 30 or 40, 30 actually, probably 35 at a good day, and an extreme thanks, and we continue to thank our trustees that they heard that call and they invested for the first time in a while in development. It was we a little over doubled our development team. That allowed us to do a lot of things that we had not done as an institution before. We're the oldest private institution in the city of San Francisco, but right around the corner from us is UCSF. Right down the road from us is a Stanford. Cal is across the bay. And so we had done a good job of of essentially working with donors that have always been loyal to our institution, but we have 100,000 plus living alumni around the world. And so that investment really allowed us to start to professionalize for the 21st century our development shop. It allowed us from an alumni engagement and communication standpoint to start reaching alumni around the world and friends we've discovered along the way in ways that we haven't before. So I've had alumni colleagues and just people in the city that have seen our ad campaigns or have been getting newsletters via email when they haven't before. And in that sense, we've really expanded our alumni reach and our donor retention reach. From a gift standpoint, it's also allowed us on the major gift side and with the support of an additional major gift officers to really get out and talk to donors in a way we haven't before, and to really talk about where USF is now, where it's going, the impact that we as an institution, because of the unique nature of our mission we have in a city like San Francisco, but also beyond. Right. So we've really seen the investment pay off. I think the challenge for us now is making sure that that investment remains relevant and the ROI that the university sees from that. And I think that's a responsibility we take seriously, and any institution that gets that kind of investment has to take seriously, is making sure that we're tracking all the metrics, not just in touches via communications online, but that we're showing in the bottom line of what we're raising every year in return to the university, because those types of investments come at the cost of other parts of the institution that also need that.
Right.
So a quick story. At that time, when people were making all of those gifts, we had a donor who made gifts to several organizations, or a brand new donor. It was $1,000. And we called to say thank you. And he said, oh, interesting. At the exact same time, I made a gift to Big National Organization 1 and Big National Organization 2, and you're the only people I've heard from. This is great. I'd love to learn more about what you're doing.
That's great.
So there is, nothing is better than picking up the phone sometimes, but being able to systematize that. Yeah. So looking at your annual fund programs and what you can build into a system. We've, over the course of the last year, introduced a giving society. I don't know if it's going to fully work yet or not. We're looking at all the data, but what it does is it systematizes the activities that we're doing to reach out to these folks in a new and different way. We've also shifted resources into stewardship officer with different levels where they're focusing on gifts that are coming in the 6 and 7 figure range, and staying on top of not only when reports are due, when our reports are appropriate, when there's new news that's coming, and actually working with the development officers to do that, and actually looking at portfolios and how we can engage better, because we do all know that our best donors, our best future donors, are our current donors, right? So we need to do a continued better job of that, and really digging into what is the impact of the dollar that people are giving. And we now have great data. I think all of us now have access to new and different data that our donors aren't used to seeing from us. So really taking advantage of some of the new systems that are being developed.
So Erin, I think a key phrase is you picked up the phone. So
well, I didn't. Somebody else did. I should be very clear.
You have people who do that. That's very important.
I don't know if Lily's here, but it was Lily.
I'm a little bit of a turn here, and we'll get back to that, but do we rely too much on email and other technology that sort of inhibits us from that personal interaction, that picking up the phone, that having the meeting? I often say to people, I think this business is fairly old-fashioned in that it is a people business, that you can't substitute technology in a lot of ways in philanthropy. I'd love to hear you guys' reaction to that. Do we hide behind email too often when we should be picking up the phone and talking to people?
It's funny, I was going through some files yesterday, and I came upon this ancient, relatively 8 years ago file, and it was a typed thing I put it on the computer. It was the personal notes that I had sent to a whole bunch of important donors. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's been a long time since I have sent that many And they were good too. I mean, they were like really personal and evidenced some knowledge of both the individual and what their gift had been. And I thought, how often now do I write, wow, exclamation point, thank you so much, blah, blah, but it's more pro forma. So it does feel like the pace continues to accelerate, and it's easy to get sloppy.
Right.
Yeah, it is. And I have to agree also that this, we had given a contribution to two of our other kids' schools, not Castilleja, but a different one. And I did receive a phone call from the head of school, and I was impressed, and she said, the first thing she said is, your kids are fine. I'm calling you for a different reason. But I think that a phone call has become, because of this era in which we live with the rapid fire emails, that now something as simple as a phone call is actually more meaningful than it used to be. In addition, the letters that are produced on a word processor, but have those personal messages, the wow in the blue ink, that's not part of the stamp form. Those really do. Yeah. Those really do matter.
I still do those.
Yeah. Okay. Good. They really do have an impact. But at Castilleja we have we're doing, like as I mentioned, a further outreach to our alums. But we also have groups we call our loyals, and we try to get people together for receptions and dinners and try to keep people in the fold as we go forward. But the tricky thing is that nowadays people's time is so valuable. So when you have events and you have gatherings, or you have a speaker and you invite your loyals to come and participate, it's a little bit tricky because I think everyone's time is so rare, and that's why I think emails have skyrocketed, because it's just so quick to fire off an email. But yeah, I think the stewardship, in the way of the personal connections, the little notes, the phone call, I do think that's extremely important.
And we do become dependent if we're not using the data to inform how we have those impact moments and touches with the alumni and donors. We looked at all of in the past year, our donor reporting and stewardship processes, how and when we're sending reports, but also on the event side, we took a look and spent the year examining the fact that we had over 100 events that development was producing for our institution, on top of what the colleges and the college and the schools were doing. So it's taken that step of looking at what data we have to decide how are we having the most impact with donors and potential donors that we're trying to reach, and making decisions that are kind of putting those sacred cows on the table of cutting things that may not be helping as much as we think they're helping, because we have the data now to show that.
That's good.
The other thing I would add back to time of all of this, if many of you are like me, are sending a lot of emails at 10 o'clock at night because you're in meetings all day long. And that's one of the reasons we lose the phone, too, because you can't call people at 10 o'clock at night, and I don't think they're very appreciative of that. So one of the things that we've done that I think is easily replicated is Stewardship Day. So blocking time that an entire team is working on this. You have an advantage with students and things making some of those calls too, but being able to carve out that time, and whether it's phone calls or handwritten notes, you guys remember what those are? There's a whole lot that you can do in that time, and doing it in a team manner I think really helps, because you get to prep for it differently, and you get to celebrate good wins and good responses together, and you get to share the information. And we've actually been tracking the amount of activity that we're having in those days now too.
So all four of you, given your schedules, what you're saying is looking weeks out ahead, build in time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Build in time to make those calls. Build in time to write those notes. Like schedule it like a meeting, so that you don't lose that. Because as you said, Erin, then you're at 10 o'clock at night. You can't call anybody, but you can fire off 20 emails, and you sort of feel like it's the same, but it's not. Mm-hmm. So if you build that in, that can really be useful. So I want to ask you all about what everyone in this room always wants to talk about, and that is, we need newer donors, we need younger donors. How do we get these younger donors involved with us? How come they don't give us any money? All these things. Talk a little bit about, again, you all represent different institutions. How well or not well have you done engaging younger donors, and share whether it's been a positive experience or successful, or frustrations and things that we can talk about and learn about.
Yeah, mine's easy. I had already mentioned that we do know that we need to bolster our outreach to our alums, including younger alums, and we've been doing that, and we've had great success thus far. We're building it a little bit more slowly, but I do think that making personal connections with these younger people at a school, obviously they've had their high school experience, their middle school experience there. It may be a little bit easier than, for instance, a hospital or a food bank because they've lived their formative years with the school. But we did learn that we really need to tap into these students and before they actually leave, and educate them on the importance of philanthropy and actually kind of bring that not into the curriculum as a class necessarily, but to plant those seeds while they're still there, and kind of train them to be philanthropic before they leave.
Yep.
And another challenging thing with Castilleja being all girls, this is just an observation on my part. This is not scientifically proven, but it does seem that young women graduate, you go off, you go to the workforce, you get married, generally, and it seems like it's oftentimes the male, the husband, who is the one who initiates philanthropy in the family. And so I think for us, we really have to empower these women to step up and support their school, which I don't think is as common.
Cindy, is really fascinating. So the Indiana Center has data around that and says
No.
single women are more likely to give more money than single men.
Interesting.
But it
Very
shifts
interesting.
when they're
married.
married.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, just
Yeah.
my personal observation.
Yep, and that we see that a lot with, it's an all-boys school and
Right.
all-girls school. The all-boys school will tend to attract more dollars.
Right, and that
necessarily.
supports this theory that
Yep.
we need to really start educating people on the concept of philanthropy
Right.
early on.
Yep.
So one of the, it's a perfect jump off for one of the initiatives that we've started several years ago, looking at that trend and looking at that reality of the role of women in society and how it's shifted and accelerated, and certainly that role is taking place in philanthropy. We started 2 or 3 years ago now a Women in Leadership and Philanthropy initiative that has been a phenomenal experience for our donors, for our alumni, for faculty, for staff, for students, and really allowing and creating an atmosphere where women donors can gather around the values of our university, similar interest. And that's one example of kind of an affinity approach that we started to take that's allowed us to tap into younger generations. The other that's kind of been taking place this year, and I should fairly say that, Peter, if I had our choice, we would teach a class probably freshman year about philanthropy and the importance of it. Academic Affairs has not really let us do that yet, but we're working on it. Would help us a lot. But we have started to take a different perspective on the role of development in the institution. The university environment, not just ours, but all universities demographically have shifted and are shifting quickly as far as the diversity of our undergraduate student bodies. And so we have, in our institution's history for the first time, sizable populations of Latino alumni, African American alumni, other groups that are emerging. And for those who've graduated in the past 10 to 15 years, their affinity, unlike some of our golden alumni, 50-year-out alumni, isn't to their next class year necessarily. It's to their cultural affinity, it's to the living learning community that they lived in, it's to the academic program specifically that they were in. And so we've started a lot of great work in our alumni engagement area of starting to map out what those relationships are as a way to tap into them, and looking at our event structure, looking at how as we institution really meet those alumni and those prospective donors where they are and try to engage them in giving that way. And so this year, one of the fun projects that we're trying, I remember Michelle being on panel last year and talking about her experience with crowdfunding, and despite that, we were like, we're going to try it, see how it goes. But that's something where a lot of our more recent alumni, we think it's actually going to have a really big impact on allowing them to choose specifically what they're funding at lower levels, but as a means to get them in the pipeline and get them used to and starting to give. So I think we're in a unique atmosphere in that we're in higher ed, that we're surrounded by people that are open to tinkering with and trying new things, and so we're taking full advantage of that. I think we also see with a lot of the situations that have happened on higher ed campuses across the country around race, ethnicity, post-election, pre-election, that it's even more important now than ever. And Peter and I have a close relationship with our Vice Provost for Student Life, Julie Oreo. We see very clearly that the pipeline really is admissions through the undergraduate student experience into alumnihood and becoming ideally a donor, and that if we aren't, to the degree that's in our lane, keeping an eye on and starting to alter some of our programming to respect where those students are and what their experience is, from however they identify, that will have ripple effects 10, 20 years from now and how they view the institution philanthropically.
Kathy?
Something that we've been trying is increasing, in terms of thinking about millennials, is particularly focusing on young families, because we think that there are a lot of parents out there who are open to and in fact enthusiastic about trying to model philanthropy for their kids. Nobody wants to raise brats, no matter what. And so if you can...
I have one.
Oh, you have one? But they get better sometimes over time, because I had two. But in all seriousness, I think that if you can find ways to bring parents and kids together around certain kinds of activities, curricula, et cetera, where the parents can model behavior for the kids actually have fun and get engaged in the cause. So we do a lot maybe around childhood hunger, because then it feels like kids helping kids, and that feels particularly powerful. Now, I'll be the first to tell you we don't yet have really great data on what the impact of this is the increasing engagement translating into increasing gifts and financial support for our organization. TBD, maybe we can report out on that next year.
Yeah.
We'll have a lot more data, but there's certainly a lot of enthusiasm for that. And so that's something that we're trying to do.
The other observation I'd share, because it kind of, I think, bouncing what you said, it kind of ties to the meeting in our case, our recent alumni where they are. We're a social justice oriented and minded institution. We're training leaders that want to go out and in their way change the world. So part of our approach, I think, and certainly one of the opportunities seems like, as we think about events, we have an April Action Day where we're doing service, and so many of the food banks in the Bay Area are part of that, and it is being creative around where are our students spending their time and their resources, how does that tie to our service orientation, and in tagging along with, I think, ideas like that. So I think that's something fascinating that I think we're probably going to talk about. If we're already doing service with our local food banks, that's an opportunity to teach families about that as an opportunity for their children. The other side I'd say for us too, the renewable resource that we have is parent giving, is students that are coming in whose parents are contributing gifts to the university, and really having that build up towards a senior year capstone gift. That's an opportunity for us as well and for the student in that case, in many cases, to be in conversation with our chief development officer or the president, whomever is appropriate. That tends to mark the beginning, ideally, of their philanthropy and kind of the parents passing the torch to the student or the soon-to-be alumni.
So the four of you represent, really resourced, strong institutions, reputationally, donors, prospect-based. What about organizations in this room where there's one development person or, there's half a development person? What kind of advice do you have for folks who are getting a program off the ground or just have a finite resources around development and fundraising and don't even have a big budget? What's sort of what would you say to someone who may come up to you at the end of this and say, this is great, but I have half a person. What do I do?
So, Rick, as you know, I used to work with an organization, Hillview Acres Children's Home, which was a residential treatment center for neglected and abused kids in Southern California. It was a really important, special place that I think was why I still work in children's health to this day. I was it. It was me. And so I wrote the newsletters and did the visit, and I was across from the president, and we would just roll our chairs back and do strategies. It's a very different universe now. But one of the things that we really focused in on at that time was working with the very few volunteers that we had and almost making them a part of our team, really having them feel invested in not only the success of the institution, but the success of our fundraising work and really taking an ownership and leadership role in that. And that changed dramatically in a really quick period. Not only did we see results, but we saw a shift in the board membership too, to an entire board that was engaged in these activities. So it was really focusing the time on where you can get the most return. So I wrote the newsletter. I don't know if that was probably the best use of my time, but really engaging others. So it's not only those that are professionals paid to do this, but there are others who are volunteering their time with us to be a part of this team, and I think we can all do a continued better job of engaging that group of people in our work.
And you probably agree that a lot of times having those volunteers making the solicitations and cultivating prospective donors is preferable, because they have the passion and they are sort of peers rather than professional.
And have great ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah, great
and that's
idea.
what we're doing at Castilleja too. Our steering committee and our cabinets are parents who are not only volunteering their time, but they're also very supportive to the campaign.
Yeah.
And so they are a mouthpiece for us, which helps. I mean, it's exactly what you said. If you get a group of passionate volunteers, it's very powerful.
Yeah.
The fundamentals of fundraising that have existed since the profession began still work. And so I think even if it's a half-time person or if it's one full-time person, the fundamentals of prospecting and being able to do diligent research and really walking a donor through those steps, if done well by just one person, can still have an impact. But there's also the advantage of 21st century technology that it didn't exist 30 years ago. And so seeing young people, whether they're alumni or in the community, that start their own foundations or start their own nonprofits, using publicly available free often software and doing things, there's a lot more tools than existed even just 10 years ago.
Even doing research.
Even doing research
Yep. Right.
and all the publicly available data that could allow someone to, if they're diligent in carving out the time, to really focus on it, really having a meaningful impact.
Kathy?
I was just coaching a woman who is the CEO of a really tiny nonprofit that does wonderful work in our neck of the woods called Bossy, as Bay Area women focused on sports, and they bring young girls along and build self-esteem through playing soccer and stuff like this. Tiny organization. I think their budget is like $500,000 or something like that. And so, of course, the CEO is the chief fundraiser and everything, basically. And she and I were talking about the fact that if her organization could allocate even a little bit of money, there are so many. I mean, look at this audience. There are a lot more women here than men. Go find yourself a part-time development officer, someone who is absolutely awesome and has young children and wants the flexibility to have a more relaxed lifestyle, maybe work from home a lot, maybe work part-time. You could get so much more than what than with the dollars that you have by bringing somebody like that into your organization. So in essence, pay with flexibility, as well as with the dollars that you do have, and that was and she's off now testing that hypothesis. So we'll see.
Report back.
Yeah, and report back. Yeah.
So it's about 11 o'clock. Thank you all for that discussion, and I would love to now open it up to everybody in the audience, folks who have questions of either the entire panel or a particular panelist. We have about 25 to 30 minutes left for those of you who can remain, so we'd love to have some questions. And we have this is, I should have said this is being live streamed, so we do have microphones.
Morning.
Yeah, I didn't tell you guys that.
We didn't sign a
Wouldn't have warned
release.
us out.
I'm just saying.
Thanks, Rick.
Rick, what are the statistics on younger people giving?
So millennials give about a third of what matures give. So matures are people who were born before 1945. They give about $1,100 to $1,200 a year. So millennials give about $400 to $500 a year to nonprofit organizations. Millennials give half of their philanthropy to one organization. 75% of millennials volunteer. So I think that's to your point, Kathy. It's just a step. You get them in, they're volunteering, they're engaged. I think to Cindy's point and Preston's point, get them in early and get them to give something.
Yep.
I mean, if they're giving Castilleja $100, they're giving USF $100, and they're 22 years old, that's great. That's what you want. So once they start to participate. So millennials are more active, I think, than the bad rap they get, but their giving just isn't there because they're still growing their financial, their story.
Question. I'd love to hear what your panel thinks about Jeff Bezos' tweet
Yes.
asking for advice on his philanthropy.
Does everybody know his tweet? Does somebody have it? Because I do know, but I don't have it in
I
front
have
of
it in
me.
my phone. One moment.
He sent a tweet out.
So I was presenting at a conference on diversity in Jesuit higher education back east and I had just the day before given a presentation to non-development professionals in higher education, kind of cluing them into how to best work with us. We're not scary. Come find our office. And they were quite astute because the next day I saw the tweet after someone sent a text to me, but it was everything everyone was talking about then the next day at the conference.
Here it is.
You got it? I got it, yeah.
I should say the questioner is an alumna of the panels, Michelle Shealy, so of course it's a hard question. This tweet is a request for ideas. I'm thinking about a philanthropy strategy that is the opposite of how I mostly spend my time, working on the long term. For philanthropy, I find I'm drawn to the other end of the spectrum, the right now. As one example, I'm very inspired and moved by the work done at Mary's Place here in Seattle. I like long term, it's a huge lever. Blue Origin, Amazon, Washington Post. All these are contributing to society and civilization in their own ways. But I'm thinking I want much of my philanthropic activity to be helping people in the here and now, short term, at the intersection of urgent need and lasting impact. If you have ideas, just reply to this tweet with the idea, and if you think this approach is wrong, would love to hear that too. Thanks, exclamation point, Jeff.
So this was everything everyone was talking about the next day at our conference, and it drilled home a point that I was making in the presentation the day before of gifts of impact. And really, not just higher education institutions, but institutions in general, the shift, particularly with a lot of the mega gifts that have been given, towards having impact in communities and long-lasting impact. So it helped, in our regard, getting our other institutions thinking about how we as anchor institutions in 28 cities across the country can demonstrate and partner and have that kind of impact in higher education, but also in other ways in our community. I could not come up with a good tweet to tweet back to him.
I have 3 letters for you, Preston. USF.
Someone else had beat me to that already and texted me that they had beat me to that.
So Erin, you're like, just put the C after the U.
Yeah.
There we go.
I was being generous. I think it's opposite of what we hear a lot is what is the investment I make now, how far does that go? So it's an interesting question, and I think it's a good one for some of the human services needs that we have at the present. So I think we would all agree there's room for everything, right, in philanthropy. But one of the things that makes me think about with the here and now is some of the new ideas are disruption, right, which I think I may have rolled my eyes at a couple of years ago, but feel a little differently about now in the way that people like Jeff Bezos and others are thinking about philanthropy and thinking about partnerships. And if you say, okay, if he says I have this amount of money and Second Harvest Food Bank and the children's hospitals, can you guys work together to have an impact now? Well, that's something new that we haven't done, but I would love to. But there's this new driver of philanthropists being creative and forcing other organizations to be creative to have better and quicker results to what they're doing. So I think that is kind of a new thing that we're just seeing generally that fits into what he's asking us.
You know, Michelle, it's interesting. The Gates Foundation, for example, has a clause in their charter that they will spend down all their money upon the death of either Bill or Melinda, whoever dies last, within 20 years. And because they've said, and they have both said publicly, if there is something that we really feel that we need to make a $20 billion investment and shift our philanthropy that way from the foundation, we'll do it. So I do think this thinking, and you know, Erin, your point about, you know, Sean Parker sort of convening all of these healthcare and academic institutions together to talk about cancer immunology, you know, he drove that. I think that is also a new factor that we're seeing here in philanthropy is that the donors are driving the gifts more than the transaction of the organization asking and the donor receiving.
Here's one of the things that I started thinking about all of us as development professionals and what the opportunity is for us to educate. And my challenge is that all of us have so much to share, and we come to this from a place of mission. Yet there's cynicism about talking to a development professional because maybe those who are new to philanthropy believe that we won't say what's right, we'll say what we're paid to say. And so I struggle with a tweet like that, that's crying for education and assistance.
Yep.
And so what can we as a profession do, not just for Jeff Bezos, but there are thousands of Jeff Bezos out there. And, we do have finite time, but we're in a moment in time where we can open the doors to so many more donors if we can find a way to legitimize, how we educate, how we help people. And that's I've been in this for 30 years, and that's my biggest struggle.
Right.
And hear all these people who are looking for help.
Right.
Usha
That's great,
has a
Michelle.
question.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to follow up with what you just said. My question is sort of taking off from that. Is there, in your data with the Silicon Valley new donors and so forth, there's a lot that are ethnically diverse right now. And, I was just wondering, is there a difference sort of culturally in people and giving? And have you sort of looked at that?
Well, I think what we have found in terms of, any CCS colleagues who could feel free to jump in, I think we have found that philanthropy is somewhat unique to the United States in terms culturally, and I think we find with it usually takes a generation. So if the family is not born in the United States, no matter what their ethnic or racial background is, that usually takes a generation for them to become more in tune with philanthropy and culture toward philanthropy. Not always the case. We've seen certainly a number of places where that's not true. That's just sort of generally what we have found. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on that.
Hello, my name is Jerry Metzger. I'm from Clausen House in Oakland. And my question is some of your organizations, and I know particularly education, social and human services and arts organizations, suddenly feel this need for urgency, emotional fundraising. So we know that when people are upset or angry or happy or excited or, that a lot of us give based on our emotion. And a couple of years ago with the Ice Bucket Challenge, that was based on fun, right? But now we're in a situation where, potentially our clients, the people we serve, could lose almost all of their personal ability to help even provide their own services. And education is based on that, and the food banks, all of those. So there's this almost, I'm dealing with when do I press the panic button, or do I need to? And what are your ideas regarding that, please?
I think we've begun to think about our messaging a little bit. Historically, our messaging was all about heart. And I think maybe at the annual fund level, for the tens of thousands of people who give small gifts, that may still be right. But to attract the larger gifts, we're playing with, we kind of call it, well, I call it, I don't think this is officially what we call it, the heart, the head, and the ego messaging. And the heart is, much as it always has been, about hungry people, hungry children, how just unacceptable that is in this kind of a community in Silicon Valley. The head is more about how we operate as a business, and that we're bringing metrics and data-driven decision-making and so on to what we do to really drive what works and what doesn't. And I think that's particularly appealing to Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and business people. And then the ego piece is, if we can't solve this here, where can we solve it? So how is it possible that 1 out of 3 kids in Silicon Valley is at risk for hunger? And if we can't address that here, if we can't solve that with the money, the smarts, the determination that we can muster here, how can we ever do that? And we don't know which of those levers or hooks is going to be the most compelling. It may vary by people, but it's the combination of the three. So I don't know if that really addresses your question.
It's a very Jesuit answer, I wanted to say that.
Oh, it did? Okay, wow. You're rubbing off, Preston.
do feel like when people are in this emotional state, especially currently, there's a little bit of panic and worry involved of the unknown out there. It does seem like people are shifting their people in our bubble here. It's gone a little bit maybe away from the heart and more toward what's going on is morally wrong, and I'm going to combat it. It feels a little bit more of a defensive philanthropy mindset where we have to protect ourselves and protect our families and protect our rights and that type of a concept. So I wonder if this level of panic, worry, distress is going in the end to create something that's extremely positive. I mean, if Van Jones, his love army concept, it's you start from a good place, but fight. And I think that this mentality is now quite pervasive in these areas, but hopefully it'll end up with a positive outcome.
Ruskin?
Ruskin Hartley with Fair Trade USA and formerly Save the Redwoods League and Heal the Bay, so heavy on the international and environmental space. I actually wanted to pick up on Jeff Bezos' comment because it came, I think, in the same week that he bought Whole Foods, or offered to buy, or threatened to buy Whole Foods, which is interesting because that's an ethical business that believes that business can be a force for good. So part of my answer to Jeff is maybe you should stop thinking about a dichotomy of philanthropy versus your business, and actually the best way you could do good is by investing in your supply chains. And that kind of leads to my question. More and more of the individuals that we're talking with are also starting to answer that question, is that this whole rise of impact investment. I'm not going to just do good with philanthropy. In fact, I don't really believe in the power of philanthropy anymore. I'm going to take control myself. So we're seeing that trend at the individual level. We're also seeing a little bit on the foundation level, with the announcement from the Ford Foundation that they're going to put $1 billion into impact investment. So I'm curious from the panel if anyone's seen that from the donors that they're working with and how they have approached that challenge, which is philanthropy is the old model and the new way is working with business, and I'm going to take control.
Mark, right? Benioff?
So we are seeing it, right? I think particularly in this community, we have a group of individuals who would prefer to invest in themselves and the ideas that they have instead of philanthropy. And then we also have people who want to do the entirety of that. I think Mark Benioff is a really great example who's tried to embody it not only from his personal philanthropy, but then stretching it into the corporate and understanding the power of the corporate dollar and investment in organizations. But it also helps us focus on who are the right people that we should be talking to at the right time, right? I mean, I think we have to be thoughtful. If we're going to just run up against this wall with this person consistently, then is that the best use of our time moving forward? Because some of these problems we're not going to be able to solve for them. I think there are the people who are asking the question, and we have the opportunity to educate them and educate them well on how they can do this better. And if people aren't ready to ask the question or hear an answer, then we need to accept that fact at a certain point too when we're looking at individuals.
The thought that comes to mind for me too is, if it's aligned with the organization's mission to pursue that path, and it's actually going to accelerate or grow the impact of the mission, great. But with Mark Benioff or other donors that are kind of looking at this and other models, it's a big investment. And so I think also stepping back as an organization and asking the question of, are we ready as an organization to shift in what a lot of cases would be how we approach this gray area of philanthropy and revenue, other revenue producing, towards achieving a common goal, and that it may not work well for a lot of organizations to go down that road.
But the question at Fair Trade is totally different than that question
Correct.
would be for a
Correct.
hospital or
for a
university,
university.
right?
So for
I
you
mean,
all, have fun. Report back to us on how it's working out for you.
We still need to find a donor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Enable us to scale, but that's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's like-
Right. That's right. Yes. We had, oh.
Hi, I'm Virginia Chung from WE Children's Services. We have 12 Head Start centers throughout the city. So my question is for the panel. Like the hospital, I don't want to keep putting our kids 0 to 5 on display. So what are your thoughts or advice on how to engage people without bringing them through? How much of your time is spent on volunteer engagement?
I'm going to answer it in a few different ways. So we have one set of volunteer engagement, as I would think about it, that is actually the work of auxiliaries or newly formed groups that are loosely attached to us or we wholly own, and they want to engage with us in a slew of different ways. And very rarely is it we need to be in the hospital working with kids, because that's just not a possibility. So they are usually partnering with us to come up with new things that are meaningful to their membership. The process of becoming a volunteer in a children's hospital includes needles. You need TB shots. You need to go through all of this. So it is a lovely clearinghouse for people who really want to get invested in that space. But I think there's other ways to tell your story. And one of the ways that we are able to do that pretty effectively is with parents, being able to tell the story of their child. And that's been very helpful when we find the right advocates to do that. Or older children who have been out of the hospital who want to share their story, which ends up being honestly a very therapeutic process for them too. We have so many people that want to raise their hand and want to share their story. So we try to do that, but not always within the walls of the hospital, and getting creative about the spaces in which we do it.
Yeah, we actually employ almost exactly as many volunteers in terms of, if you translated their hours into full-time equivalents, it's about 150, and that's about how many people work at the food bank. So we actively engage volunteers, but a lot of those volunteers are coming into our facility and they're sorting food. So the question is, how do you bring the client, the people that we're helping, into that space in a way that is respectful? It's maybe not exactly the same challenge, but it's our variant of that. We're doing some work where we're trying to put really, at its most basic, put the client at the center, back at the center, really focus on the people that we serve and try to understand what's really going on in their world, and in particular, what gets in the way of them seeking food assistance. And one part of that project is collecting oral histories from people. And so we're just at the very start of thinking about how could we combine some oral histories or snippets from those oral histories, which brings some of the nuance and the reality of what it's like to be hungry, living in this extraordinarily expensive area. Link that at least with a photo and bring that into our facility so that people who are doing a good thing, coming in and sorting food, have a sense of what that's going to translate to for the ultimate people, for the people in need.
Caitlin, is there a question here?
There were a couple threads that came up. Rick, you mentioned something about how people growing up in this country sort of learn about philanthropy. And often when I'm working with the people on fundraising teams that I'm working with, I try and talk about the uniqueness of the American experience, namely that is unique to this country, that the government doesn't do what it does in most every other country in the world. Also, it feels like that, what's happening at our national level, that there's a very deliberate trending away from even more or even less than what the government should be doing. And then there's this recent publication, which I've sort of made a point of not reading because it gets me very depressed, called The Givers, right? Which essentially talks about the fact that independent philanthropy is sort of starting to set a mandate, and then as soon as Trump threatens to pull out of the Paris agreement, which would take years anyway, and he can't do, Bloomberg immediately steps forward and says, as an independent philanthropist, I'm going to take care of this.
Right.
How do we as an industry address some of these kinds of issues where, oh my gosh, like cutting the NIH, like really, like getting rid of the NEA at as low as it already is, and then to a certain degree, the most sort of spirited reaction that I've heard so far also from the group is the one from Castilleja who's saying, let's really look at Van Jones. Let's think about how do we really talk about what we fundamentally need to do as a nation, and also our need to rally to support the government and the fundamental need for infrastructure, while we're at that same time really trying to inspire people to be philanthropic. The Silicon Valley findings showed this gross increase in proceeds, in a sense, going into philanthropy with local community-based investment rather low proportionally, and it was saying that all the Silicon Valley group work is community-based. how do we find the balance across all of that in terms of really thinking about infrastructure and at the same time trying to message the importance of government support at the same time as our passionate need to get private individuals inspired?
Thanks, James. I have a couple of quick responses to that. One is, for context, the city of Berlin has a bigger arts budget than the NEA. So to kind of give you a sense of, public investment, versus America. That's been true for a very long time. What we have found in a lot of our work is that public-private partnerships work, that donors respond very, very well to public support, and public entities respond very, very well to private support. So to me, that's, losing that would be tragic, because I think it's, for a lot of ways, an engine of philanthropy. And I think to Cindy's point, it is not just about being emotional, it's about sort of being organized and fighting, but doing it in a way, and sadly, maybe this is the way we kind of break through that 2% of GDP, but I do think it has to be, to Cindy's point, it's got to be, it can't just be kind of all over the place. It's got to be organized, and it's got to be, but it has to be passionate, and you really have to have a fighting spirit. Love to have other
I feel like, obviously this might spiral into a political conversation, and I agree it's just extremely depressing. But the tribalism that's happening right now is just off the charts. It used, when people compare this current situation to like Watergate situation, I feel like the people are different now. People don't have that same level of moral standard, and I think that is playing a big role in this. And I know that. These individuals can step in and try to put Band-Aids on, on this disaster that's happening. But in addition, I do feel that the entire state of California, for instance, is extremely powerful in our regulations for our autos and across the board, different types of regulations for air quality, water quality, and that we can set certain levels at a state level that will then dictate what the auto manufacturers are going to create, because we buy a lot of cars here. Right. Things like that, I think are very powerful. And so I do feel like this, like you said, the organization aspect of it, where we have to band together to kind of to get our heads together and kind of battle it in new and unique ways, is going to be something that unfortunately we have to do.
I think there's another interesting way to think about philanthropy in this space. So I'll just put it in our own children's health context. We're not going to be able to survive if we don't have federal dollars. Right. But do the federal dollars have to come to us in the exact same way and fill the exact same buckets that they always have? Maybe not. And there could be a role, and there is a role, I think, for philanthropy to actually fund organizations like children's hospitals, in this context, to come up with new care delivery models. How do we get to kids earlier so that we're healing them, or we're taking care of them before they have diabetes, before they have asthma, partnering with other organizations so that we have food pharmacies. Yep. So kids are getting healthy food, learning how to eat healthy from an early start that's driven through their primary care, because we know that kids will come into primary care, parents are more likely to be there. And philanthropy can play a role in changing that. So maybe we are still going to be reliant on dollars, we're just not going to be reliant on the exact same dollars. So it's still the two of them coming together, but there's a really important place for philanthropy in that's not just filling the same bucket.
I also think the state is going to be much, much more important. Yes. I mean, the fact that California is the 6th largest economy on the planet is phenomenal. And there are a lot of people that are determined in our state legislature to ensure that there will at least be some cushioning, if not an absolute ability to make up all of what doesn't come from the federal government. So I think there's an opportunity to pursue some of those public-private partnerships at a state level, even beyond what we already do.
I'd say from a higher ed perspective, 2 fronts. One, we're not currently, but it's August 20th, we'll be starting to educate a whole new class of freshmen and have returning students, and so there's the critical societal responsibility we have of educating future leaders with the Jesuit lens of all the values of the Jesuits instill in students. And a lot of Jesuit institutions use the phrase, go forth and set the world on fire. We have to take seriously equipping them with the tools to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, we had our fair share of campus protests throughout the year on any number of issues. And I was talking with Cindy earlier about my giving feedback to students on how to better protest throughout the academic year. But part of that is serious. I mean,
That was based on a tire.
But I think as part of that is the serious note of just in the years since I was an undergrad, apathy is not the right word I would use with the students that are in higher education right now, but there is a difference. And we had, when I was in college, the benefit of alumni who were in college in the 60s and the 70s and protested and organized in a varying number of ways. So I think for us, from a higher education standpoint, it's beyond protest empowering students to realize how much power they have, particularly as voting students in a state like California, but organizing in ways other than just protesting. From a philanthropic standpoint, for us, it's a real question we struggle with. We're, as our Father Paul Fitzgerald, our president, says, we're a strong institution as the University of San Francisco, but we're also vulnerable. We're a tuition-dependent school. So in different ways, with varying ways of the type of government support that goes to a lot of different organizations, we're at risk from a financial aid standpoint and some of the things that are being relegated by a person whose name I will not say, Secretary of Education, which I would say at this point any of us could be probably more qualified to be Secretary of Education. But those are the types of daily concerns that make our work on the development side in higher ed even more important and more of a value proposition around access to higher education and the importance of things like strengthening our scholarship support for students, how we navigate the issue of DACA students in a quiet, philanthropic way, and having to explain to students and alumni that, yes, the Jesuits care deeply about DACA students. No, we're not going to talk about it broadly on the national media because we care deeply about our DACA students. And so I don't think there's any one, DACA students are undocumented students that attend colleges and universities, sorry. But, so I think it's a real challenge in all of our sectors. And I don't think there's an easy way to answer it, but philanthropy is going to play a very different role in how we creatively try to work through this period, hopefully, and come through the other side stronger and more with more conviction.
And I just want to mention one more thing on this one more topic on this issue is that there's I think a very interesting and exciting kind of addition to the landscape, and that is the intersection of organization and philanthropy with technology. And it's this kind of an instant organization where with no boundaries really, because these websites like Swing Left and Flippable and Act Blue.
Countable,
yeah. Pardon?
Countable.
Yeah, and so of course I'm naming off the liberal ones. I don't know if they're already on the other side, but these interfaces are absolutely incredible in their ease of use. And you get on this page and you can see all of the hotly contested races around the country, and you can say, I want to take $100 and divide them equally among these hotly contested races for the person on the left, or in these cases, or you can divide it up any way you want. But it's basically an interface where it's check boxes. You put your credit card number in there, and you click commit, and I think it's a whole new level of tapping into this individual giving that's going to become very important because it's very powerful, and people feel very empowered even with a small amount of money. $50, you can say, yes, I'm going to help this race in Georgia, and this So I think that's going to be that's exciting to me, and I think it's going to be something that will kind of coordinate with the concept of Van Jones and the Love Army, and it's got to come from a good place. And now these people can band together regardless of where you are demographically or geographically. So that'll be good.
We have time for one last question.
Oh yeah, one of the things that was interesting to me as a recovering former Community Foundation executive was the concern we have with major donations now have money driving this whole process. And just as we've seen how it perverts the political process, I think there's a danger that large donations and large donors, because they are essentially undemocratic, they're not mediated through any process that reflects need. They reflect the personality of someone, and they may or may not do due diligence. But I'm interested in your thoughts about how people in the field of philanthropy can ensure that money is really not the issue. It's only a metaphor for local control, for local input, and that we focus on not the effects of things, but the causes of things. So it's fundamentally the investments that we make change the dialogue and the nature of the issues we're addressing. I've recently been directing group of small organizations on the Arizona-Mexico border who are dealing with all the stresses of that border, and particularly migration. And our issues there, and I go there about 4 or 5 days a month to continue to work on this, is how can we change the whole conversation about the border? And USF has sent a group of interns through an intern program. I just did a seminar last night with a group of 12 Dartmouth students who are interested in nonprofits, and their concern was the fact that I don't have gazillions of dollars. Does that mean that my getting into this field is maybe not that important right now? Because what's important that we respond to all the billionaires who are out there who are really going to drive the process. And I was saying, no, that's not true at all. So how do you address that particular issue and that distortion so we don't go the same road as what I call the Koch brothers? Depends on how you pronounce that. So anyway, please.
That was funny.
Yes.
I never thought of it
and
that way.
I wrote that one too. Yeah.
I mean, at our school, it's more about unrestricted funds. It's a much smaller scale, I think, than anything that involves, politics and borders between countries. But we obviously always encourage parents to donate unrestricted so that we can, steer the funds in the most needed areas at the school. And it's with our small community, it's kind of it's an educational thing where we want to encourage people to give for whatever reason at any amount, but at the same time, yet you don't want them to be able to necessarily steer and actually have an effect on your goal if it's not exactly lined up with what you're intending. So we don't have a huge issue with that at our school, but I can see it on a different level for sure.
The best example is the donor advised fund.
Right.
And one of the reasons I left the Community Foundation field was I was sitting in a group of foundation executives, and one probably who was a major foundation in this area spoke proudly of how they'd just gotten a large donation from a lady who wanted to build a park where dogs and cats could play together. And they took the donation. That's what we need. Be serious. And they looked at me like, well, that's what she wants to do with her money. So they were going to invest it. But that was one of the reasons I decided to go elsewhere.
Yeah, I think you probably made a wise choice.
No, I asked them to let me know when they opened it because I wanted to go down there and observe.
Well, I want to say thanks to everybody. Cindy, Kathy, Erin, Preston, you guys were fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for coming. We really appreciate it, and we love the questions and the interaction. And come back again next year. We'll see you before that. Thanks.
I know.
That's hilarious.